The letter arrived in early October, carried eastward from the Dakota Territory in the same cracked mail pouch that had once ferried war orders, now stained with tobacco and frost. It came addressed to Miss Clara Wendell of Albany, New York, penned in the spidery hand of a man who had signed his name simply as James T. Hawthorne. He was 37, widowed, owner of a small homestead north of Devil's Lake, and in need of a wife to help endure the coming winter. Clara sat in the parlor of her aunt's boarding house, the letter unfolded across her knees. The fire hissed low in the grate, wind pecking at the shuttered windows like a child's fingers. She was 26 and already considered an old maid by Albany standards, having spent the past decade nursing the sick, burying both parents, and avoiding the sharp-toothed matchmaking of her aunt, who'd grown bitter on behalf of them both. The proposal was plain: a roof, food, shared labor, and decency. No promises of love, no poetry. James Hawthorne was not a man given to embellishment. Clara found that refreshing. She studied the handwriting again. Nothing seemed desperate in it, just weary. Her aunt warned her not to go, called the man a trapper or a brute or worse, some half-crazed recluse looking for a servant, but Clara didn't scare easy anymore. She had watched sickness peel her mother to bone, had buried her father with dirt clinging to her skirts, had seen her name go unnoticed by every man with clean fingernails and ambition. What was a Dakota winter to that? By November, she was on the train, wrapped in her father's old coat, sitting among crates of canned tomatoes and swaddled infants and a rattling cage of chickens. She read the letter over and over during the long days west. It was folded so many times the edges tore. James met her at the station with a team of black mules and a face like granite. He did not kiss her hand or call her pretty. He lifted her trunk into the wagon with ease, offered her the front seat beside him, and handed her a wool blanket without a word. His voice was low and rough when he finally spoke. "You'll find it cold, hard land, not like the cities." Clara looked straight ahead, toward the white-swept prairie that rolled endlessly into the dusk. "I'm not like the cities either." The house was built from dark wood, squatting beneath a hill like something half-buried. It had only one story but many scars, a patched roof, a warped door, and a front porch sagging from the weight of too many storms. A faint curl of smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, the hearth glowed and stew simmered. It wasn't comfort, but it wasn't cruelty either. They married the next morning with only the wind to witness it. James placed a thin gold band on her finger, a ring too small for her hand and likely meant for the wife he'd lost. Clara didn't ask what had happened to her. He didn't offer. That first week, Clara scrubbed the floors with lye and hot water, scalding her palms until the skin blistered. She fed the hens, chopped carrots, milked the goats with trembling hands. James fixed the door latch and showed her how to trap snowmelt from the roof. He was never cruel, but he wasn't soft. He kept his words measured and his eyes averted, as though he feared she might vanish if he looked too long. The wind never stopped. It howled through the eaves at night, low and hungry. In December, the snow came hard and fast, burying the barn doors. Clara rose at dawn to light the fire and found James already outside, breaking ice with a pickaxe, steam rising from his shoulders. He never asked for help. He simply assumed she would offer it, and she did. There were moments when he looked at her, not just with his eyes, but with something older and heavier than words. When he handed her the last biscuit or placed an extra log on her side of the hearth. In January, he surprised her by repairing the cracked music box she'd packed but hadn't dared open. He placed it beside her sewing kit one evening without comment. It played only 2 songs now, both slow and mournful. One night a coyote came to the coop. James fired his rifle into the dark and came back with blood on his coat. Clara cleaned it off without asking if it was his or the animal. He watched her hands move over the fabric and said quietly, "I was alone a long time." She didn't answer. She just wrapped his coat in a clean rag and laid it near the fire. February thawed and refroze, cruel and quick. James brought in a rabbit one day and laid it on the table with pride. Clara cleaned and cooked it with spices from her trunk, and for the first time he smiled. It was a tired, crooked thing like the house itself, but it held a warmth she hadn't seen before. He asked her to play the music box that night. She wound it once, and when it stopped, he asked her to wind it again. Spring came early that year. The rivers surged and the earth cracked open with green. Clara's hands were calloused by then, her cheeks pinked with wind and fire. The hens laid fat brown eggs, the goats grew round with milk. James let her plant marigolds near the porch. She saw him watching her through the window, a cup in his hand, unmoving. He touched her shoulder that night, not by accident, not in passing, a slow, deliberate hand. "I thought you'd leave when the snow melted," he said. "I thought I would too," she said, and didn't move away. The summer brought storms that rattled the glass. One afternoon, a twister tore a mile west and flattened the Miller homestead. James rode out with a shovel and rope, and Clara stitched bandages from old sheets. When he returned, face streaked with mud, he rested his head against her belly and let her hold him. He didn't cry, just breathed. He took her hand under the cottonwood tree and pressed it against the scar that ran from his ribs to his spine. "A wound from a mining collapse years back," he said. She traced it in silence. In July, they built a new shed together. Clara held the nails in her mouth while he hammered, the rhythm steady like heartbeats. They talked more, not often but better, about his brother who died young, about the war that took her cousin, about the way the prairie holds secrets under the grass. He kissed her in August, not rushed or ashamed, like something earned. But the land is never still for long. One dusk in September, riders came up from the south. 2 men and a boy, all strangers. One wore a deputy's star, and one rode a painted mare with a limp. They asked for James by name. Clara watched from the window, fingers knotted in her apron. She couldn't hear what was said, but the look in James' eyes made her step back. When the men rode off, he stood there long after, unmoving. That night he told her part of it, how he'd once killed a man in Texas, how it hadn't been murder, but it hadn't been clean either. A card game, a knife, too much whiskey. He left before they could hang him. He'd been running ever since. "They know where I am now," he said. "I don't know if they'll come back." Clara stared at the fire, then at him. "You want me to go?" "No," he said, "but I'll understand if you need to." She rose, walked over, and laid her head against his chest. "I came for winter," she said, "but I stayed for you." The fire popped, the wind rustled the shutters. She felt his arms around her, not as a shield but as an anchor, a man made of stone, cracking open. And outside, the prairie waited, patient and wide, for whatever came next. October brought frost again, but not silence. The mail wagon came later than usual, its driver shaken from a lightning storm that had downed 3 trees along the southern road. With it came 2 letters, one addressed to James in thick legal handwriting, the other addressed to Clara in a child's clumsy scrawl. James read his aloud by the fire. It was from a county magistrate in Texas, warning him that formal charges might yet be filed, manslaughter reopened under a new district attorney with an eye for old debts. They had no proof of current whereabouts, only rumor, but the law was circling closer. Clara's letter was from her sister's youngest, Marable, 8 years old, left orphaned in a boarding house in Troy after diphtheria swept through the family. The girl wrote that her caretakers drank, that she'd been slapped for losing a ribbon, that she dreamed of chickens and snow and women who didn't scream. Clara folded the letter with trembling fingers. She said nothing at first. That night, she lay beside James, both of them listening to the wind. "Would it be too much," she asked, "to bring her here?" He stared at the ceiling. "A child," he said, not unkindly, just considering. "Blood of mine, only one left. We'll need another bed." She exhaled, and something broke inside her that had been clenched for years. James rode out the next morning to find timber. Clara swept the hearth, stirred the ash, and folded every quilt they had. In town, they wired back east, paid the rail fare, and gave their name as guardians. She spent that night sewing a blue dress with buttons like tiny seeds. Marable arrived in November with a scab on her chin and 2 missing front teeth. She carried a cloth satchel and a silence that felt older than any child should carry. At first, she wouldn't speak to James, only stared at him with wide, unblinking eyes like a feral kitten. Clara knelt and took the child's hand, fingers small as bird bones. "You're safe now," she said. They gave her the back room closest to the kitchen. James built her a stool so she could reach the sink. Clara showed her how to churn butter, how to fold dough. She was quick, watchful. She never cried. That worried Clara most. Snow came again and laid thick against the roof. At night, James read from an old almanac. Marable listened with her head tilted like a fox, memorizing the names of stars. One morning in December, James came inside with blood on his lip. "Cougar tracks near the barn," he said. "It's not afraid of fences." He hung a lantern near the goat pen and set snares beneath the low branches. Marable sat by the window at dusk, watching the dark. Clara wondered if the girl saw more than animals out there. One night, Clara found her in the pantry, curled into a basket, clutching a broken piece of chalk. "I dream bad," she whispered. At the orphan house, they came in after lights. Clara knelt and pulled her close. She didn't ask for details, she just held her. Later that week, James carved the girl a small wooden horse. Marable didn't smile, but she slept better after that. Clara noticed she'd begun to hum when the dough was rising. By January, James taught her to shoot, a tiny rifle cut down from an old .22. Clara watched from the porch, heart clenched, as the child lifted the gun, steadied her breath, and struck a tin can off a fence post. "Good," James said, "again." Clara asked him why he'd done it. "She'll need to know how," he said, "whatever else happens." He wasn't wrong. The men from Texas hadn't returned, but Clara saw James flinch every time hooves sounded from the South Trail. He began sleeping with the shotgun leaned against the wall, not fear, readiness. In March, a stranger rode through town asking questions. He didn't stop at their farm, but he left a bitter taste behind. The blacksmith said he wore a lawman's badge but no name. Clara pressed her palm to James's chest that night and felt the tension in his ribs. "We leave," he said, "if it comes to it." "I won't run," Clara answered, "not without a fight." He looked at her then, not the same look he'd given her that first week by the fire. This was deeper, like he was seeing her fully, finally. Spring thaw came late, ice hanging from the eaves like jagged teeth. Marable turned 9 in April. They made a cake from molasses and dried apples. She smiled for the first time then, a lopsided, gap-toothed thing that lit her whole face. James built her a swing from an old wagon axle. Clara stitched her a bonnet of violet calico. That night, Clara and James sat on the porch, watching lightning far off on the plains. "You never asked," he said, voice low, "about my first wife. I figured you'd tell me when it mattered. She died in childbirth, the baby too. I built that shed with my bare hands so I wouldn't scream." Clara didn't speak. She reached for his hand, held it tight. "I thought I'd buried myself with them," he said, "but you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. The wind shifted. "I know," she said. "But peace is always rented on land like this, never owned." In May, Clara saw smoke on the horizon, 3 columns, narrow and rising fast. Signals, old soldier tricks. James gathered the rifles. He kissed Clara's hand, then he knelt before Marable. "You remember what I taught you?" She nodded, solemn. She already wore the pistol belt he'd cut down to size. "If I tell you to run, you run east to the grove. Don't look back." "I won't," she said. And Clara saw something in both their eyes. A flint struck, a spark held. They waited through the dusk, but no one came. That night Clara heard a voice outside, hoarse and male. She rose with the rifle in her hand and stepped onto the porch. A man stood near the gate, bleeding from the thigh. He wore a deputy badge, but it was tarnished. He raised both hands. "Not here for your man. I'm here because someone else is." James stepped beside her. "Who?" "U.S. Marshals out of Houston, riding with a warrant, 3 days behind me." "Why warn us?" Clara asked. The man swallowed. "Because the one he killed, he was my cousin, and I still think it was fair." Then he turned and limped into the dark. James wanted to ride that night. Clara stopped him. "You run now, they'll follow forever," she said. "We make a stand. You have a right to this life." He looked down at Marable, who had appeared in the doorway barefoot, holding the music box. "We make a stand," he echoed. She wound it once. It sang its slow, broken tune into the still air. 3 more days until the riders. 3 days to ready themselves. And through it all, the wind carried the scent of spring, dirt and thaw, sweat and courage. The kind that only blooms when something has been buried and refuses to stay dead. The first day, they dug in. James sharpened stakes and sunk them along the north edge of the pasture, where the land narrowed and the soil stayed soft. Clara boiled water, wrapped bandages, and filled every jar they had with dried meat and hard biscuits. Marable fetched water from the creek without being asked. Her shoulders straightened when she walked now, no longer hunched from fear. They didn't speak much. Every word held weight, and every silence had a purpose. By the second day, James had set tripwires among the trees and nailed a rifle loop into the attic eaves. He showed Clara how to aim from the kitchen window, how to follow a rider's shape through dust and sunflash. She was no stranger to pain, but killing was something else. Still, she didn't flinch when he handed her the shotgun. Marable practiced reloading shells with the steady calm of someone who had already lived too many lives in too few years. They slept in shifts. Every creak in the walls felt louder than before. Clara woke once to find James sitting at the hearth, not moving, his hands open in his lap. The fire had died to ash. "You think they'll kill you?" she asked. He didn't look up. "They might try. Then they'll have to go through me first." At that, he did look up, and she saw what she'd known for months now but had never named out loud. Love, not soft or sudden, not the kind that bloomed with letters and flowers. This was the kind that sharpened itself to a knife's edge, that fortified, that held. Dawn broke yellow on the third day. No clouds, no wind, the air hung too still. Marable spotted the riders first, 3 of them, shadowed against the eastern ridge. James took the rifle to the loft. Clara pulled Marable into the root cellar and bolted the door, placing a pistol in the girl's lap. "You shoot if you have to," she said. "You shoot and don't blink." Then she climbed back out. The lead rider wore a dust-colored duster, U.S. Marshal badge glinting like a fresh coin. The other 2 were younger, military postures, clean beards. They didn't dismount. They just circled, slow and measured, like buzzards on windless air. "James Hawthorne," the marshal called. "We've got a warrant. You know why we're here." James stood in the doorway, unarmed, hands loose at his sides. His voice was steady. "Then come say it to my face." "We will, but we ain't gonna bury anyone who stands in the way." Clara stepped beside James. She lifted the shotgun so they could see the barrel. She didn't speak. The marshal hesitated. Maybe he hadn't expected a woman to stand at the gate. Maybe the child's toys still scattered in the yard unsettled him, but his horse shifted, nervous. James nodded toward the porch. "You shoot me, she buries me. You try to take me, you'll find out what winter here taught her." The marshal's mouth twitched. "It's manslaughter. The family wants justice." "Justice ain't yours to bring," Clara said. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the marshal reined back. "We'll return with 10 more, and if she's still here, she'll hang too." They rode off without a shot fired. Dust rose behind them, thick as steam. James leaned against the doorframe when they were gone. That bought time, not peace. "I wasn't asking for peace," Clara said. "Only a chance." They gathered what they could, packed salt, tools, matches. Marable came up from the cellar holding the music box in both hands. "We leaving?" she asked. "No," Clara said. "We're vanishing." They set fire to the barn that night. Clara watched the flames rise and bend the sky red. Smoke would draw eyes for miles, but when searchers came, there'd be nothing left to claim. They headed west under cover of night. No roads, no trails, only old footpaths James remembered from the days before he'd settled. Marrable rode in the saddle with Clara. James walked, rifle slung low. They crossed a river in silence. Clara's skirts froze stiff before they reached the far bank. For days they didn't speak names. It was safer that way. Clara wrapped Marrable in wool and kept a knife strapped to her calf. James hunted by dusk, and Clara cooked by starlight. Sometimes she caught him looking at her when the fire popped, a wonder in his eyes like he still didn't know how this had all become his life. But it had. They found a small cabin deep in the timber north of the Turtle Mountains, abandoned, leaning slightly west, but with 4 walls and a stone hearth. James cleaned out the moss. Clara patched the chimney. They hung a bell above the door, an old trick for early warning. They didn't plant flowers here. They planted traps. By midsummer, they had a garden again, a goat named Edith, and a creek that ran close enough to chill milk and bathe without freezing. Marrable caught frogs and began drawing them in charcoal on the walls. "You'll have to teach her letters," James said one night. "I'll teach her how to choose the right words," Clara said. "She already knows the weight of silence." They lived like ghosts, careful, quiet, free. James carved new names into the porch beam. Clara inked new initials onto their papers. Marrable no longer answered to anything but Belle. They told the truth only to each other. That was enough. But shadows still stirred. One August, a man passed near the glade, close enough to see smoke, close enough to notice footprints. He didn't knock. He returned 2 weeks later with another man. James saw them from the ridge. He didn't shoot, not yet. They left nothing behind after that, not a plate, not a shell. They buried their ash and swept their prints. Clara slept with the pistol tucked beneath her pillow. She braided Marrable's hair tight so it wouldn't snag if they had to run again. James taught her how to fish with a snare line. Clara taught her how to lie without blinking. "We're not running forever," Clara said one morning. "No," James said, "just long enough to outlast the old world." He took her hand beneath the cottonwoods. It was the same hand he'd held that first winter. She thought of what they had built from what others had thrown away. No minister, no ceremony, but she kissed him slow, and that was vow enough. The sky turned orange in September, smoke from wildfires to the west. They watched the sun darken, ash falling like dry snow. Marrable sat between them, quiet, drawing trees in the dirt with a stick. "I used to be scared of fire," she said. "What changed?" Clara asked. "It scares them too now." James smiled at that. He looked out toward the line of hills, toward whatever waited beyond them. "We'll keep moving if we have to," he said. "No," Clara said, "we make our stand here." The wind picked up, trees whispered. And through it all, the music box played its crooked tune, winded gently by a girl who no longer feared the dark. By October, the sky took on that particular shade of steel that warned of early snow. Birds fled south in strange, silent flocks, and the trees dropped their leaves overnight like secrets they could no longer keep. Clara felt the shift first, a prickling on the back of her neck as she stood over the boiling pot of blackberry preserves. She turned without knowing why and saw James standing in the doorway, not moving, holding something in his hand. It was a leather pouch, worn, stained, marked with an old U.S. Marshal's insignia. Burned at the edges as if someone had tried to destroy it and failed. He dropped it on the table. "They found the first place," he said. Clara's hands didn't shake, but her voice went dry. "Who?" "Deputies from Bismarck, not Texans, locals. They dug up the chimney stones. Found spent cartridges and a letter I'd buried. They know we were there." Marrable looked up from the floor, where she'd been sorting acorns by size. Her eyes narrowed, quiet, calculating. "What now?" she asked. "We finish what we started," Clara said. "We stop running." James didn't answer right away. He stepped out onto the porch and stared west, toward the ridgeline where the pines grew thick and black. When he returned, he carried the long case, the one he never opened unless the stakes had changed. Inside was the Henry rifle, the one he'd used in Missouri, in Texas, in the places he didn't name. He oiled the barrel while Clara loaded shell boxes. Marrable helped them inventory the cellar, whispering numbers like spells. There was no ceremony to the preparation, no speeches, only motion. That night they pulled the bed closer to the back wall. They slept with boots on. By week's end, the riders came. 5 of them, federal badges this time, clean and new. One wore a navy coat lined with rabbit fur, the kind no man on frontier wages could afford. Another had a long scar beneath his eye, white against his cheek like a lightning crack. None of them smiled. They came at dawn with no warning, no bluff, no mercy. James saw the glint of steel through the trees and fired once from the ridge. One horse reared. A man fell but rose again. Clara herded Marrable into the cellar and bolted the door behind her. "Wait for my voice," she said. "Only mine." Marrable nodded and hugged the music box tight. Clara climbed to the attic window. The field was already churning with hoofprints, gunpowder hanging in the air like cordite perfume. She sighted down the barrel and fired once, then again. Below, James moved like something shaped from battle, calm, swift, sure. 2 riders dismounted and crept toward the porch. One got within 10 feet before Clara dropped him with a clean shot to the chest. The other ran. But there were 5. And now only 3 stood. The one in the navy coat called out. "James Hawthorne, you are wanted under federal warrant. You are harboring a minor under false guardianship. Come out, or we torch the house." Clara's voice cut through the air before James could answer. "You come 1 step closer, and I'll gut you like a steer. I've buried better men in frost." Silence, then a gunshot. It clipped the chimney brick. Clara ducked and reloaded. The second man circled behind the goat pen. James met him there. It was fast. A single swing of the buttstock to the jaw, a snap of bone. "Now 2. The marshal shouted again. "You've made your choice, Hawthorne." "No," James said, stepping into view. "I made mine years ago. She's just the reason I'll finish it." He fired twice. The second shot took the marshal's hand off at the wrist. The last man turned his horse and ran. They didn't follow. Not yet. Afterward, the yard smelled like blood and smoke. Marrable emerged from the cellar slowly, pistol still in her hands. Her dress was smudged with coal dust. Clara knelt and wiped her cheek. "You all right?" she asked. "I didn't shoot," Marrable said. "That's all right. I would've." James stood over the bodies. He didn't say a word, just watched the wind pull at the dead men's coats. Clara burned the warrant papers they carried. She found nothing inside their saddlebags but ammunition and dry biscuits. Mercenaries, most likely, wearing federal badges without federal orders. They buried the bodies on the far side of the creek. Shallow graves, no markers. "We'll have more soon," James said. "I know," Clara answered. "We'll be ready." That winter, no one came. Snow dropped in sheets so thick the trees vanished for days. Ice hung from the roof like the teeth of giants. Marrable read aloud by firelight, her voice slow but steady. James taught her to clean the Henry. Clara taught her to stitch, to salt meat, to trap quail. They were not hiding anymore. They were waiting. In February, an old trapper passed through and warned them of posters, wanted men and women, marked by description, not name. A woman with burn scars on her hand, a man with a limp, a girl with a wooden horse. Clara offered him stew and a bed of straw. He left the next morning with new boots and no questions. Marrable carved letters into the beams above her bed, her own code, her own scripture. Clara sometimes found her staring at the fire with that same distant look James used to wear. She feared it, but she understood it. You couldn't protect a child from a world they already survived. One night, as frost bloomed on the glass, James reached for Clara in the dark. "You should have never come with me." She turned, wrapped her legs around his, pressed her mouth to his ear. "I didn't come for you, I stayed for you." He didn't sleep that night, neither did she. By spring, they began to hear stories. That the law had moved on, that new crimes had replaced old ones. That war was coming again in places farther west, bigger fights, bloodier. The names James had feared were gone from the posters. The girl was no longer mentioned. But the world hadn't forgiven them. Not really. They kept the rifles close, but now they also built again, a second shed, a smokehouse, a library of sorts made from stones and wood where Clara stored her books and Marable kept her drawings. James carved a ring from whalebone and gave it to Clara one morning without ceremony. She slipped it on beside the gold one that no longer fit. And in a world still eager to erase them, they carved out something no lawman could reach. A life. A line drawn in blood and fire. A home remade by hands that had every reason to destroy, and instead chose to endure. Summer came long and dry. Grass curled brown beneath the hooves of elk, the creek thinned to a whisper, and the garden bore small, bitter fruit that Clara boiled into stew anyway. Survival didn't ask what you preferred, it asked what you could bear. They lived close to the land, closer still to one another. Marable grew taller, her face thinning into the hard geometry of womanhood. She spoke less but watched more. Clara recognized that change, knew it like her own bones, the shift from being small to being hunted. James carved fence posts from fallen pine, not because they needed them, but because work was the only way he could outpace thought. He still watched the ridgelines, still listened too long when wind changed direction. But no one came. And that was its own burden. One morning, Clara found Marable by the edge of the woods, barefoot in the dew, a rifle across her lap and a dead fox beside her. She wasn't crying, just staring. "It came for the chickens," the girl said. Clara sat beside her. "Did you hesitate?" "No," Marable said. Clara took her hand, cold, steady. She remembered that age, when the world tested you before you even knew the rules. "I didn't want to kill it," Marable whispered. "You didn't want to die either," Clara said. "That's the bargain." The girl nodded. "I know." That night she didn't eat, just wound the music box once and listened in the dark. Late July brought a letter, delivered by a wandering Lutheran priest on his way north. He didn't ask for names, just water and bread. When he left, he gave James a folded slip of paper with no return mark. Clara read it by firelight. Her eyes didn't widen, but her hands gripped the edge of the table. "It's from a cousin," she said. "One of mine, distant but blood." James said nothing. "She's dying, wants to leave her land to us, 40 acres farther west, Montana territory, under different names." Still, he said nothing. "She knows who we are, says she doesn't care." James stirred the fire with an iron poker. "It means starting again," he said. "We've done that before. It means trusting someone." Clara folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. "It means one more season." They left in September, not fleeing, choosing. The cabin was buried under brush by then, roof overgrown with moss and brambles. James nailed the windows shut from the inside. Clara planted lavender in the old fire pit. Marable drew a single mark on the doorframe, a V carved into a circle, a sign only they would recognize if they ever returned. They traveled by night, avoided rail lines, paid with coin and silence, slept beneath open skies, and when wolves howled, they did not flinch. Montana rose up like a sleeping god, wide valleys, blue-shadowed mountains, and air so clean it tasted like mercy. The cousins' land sat in a hollow north of the Gallatin River. The house was barely standing. The woman had died before they arrived, but she'd signed every deed. There was no law waiting, no marshal with old debts, just soil and time and 3 people with hands strong enough to build. The first winter was cruel, deep snow that cracked trees in half, a storm that buried the barn to its rafters. Marrable fell ill once, fevered for 3 days, shivering and speaking in half-dreams about the cellar, the music box, the dead men whose names she never learned. Clara sat beside her with a wet cloth and whispered the only lullaby she remembered. Not a song of comfort, but one her mother had sung to ward off fear. A tune made of warning and memory. When Marrable woke, her voice rasped, "Did I say anything?" "You remembered everything," Clara said. The girl turned her face to the wall. Good. She recovered by spring, hardened like clay baked too long in sun. They planted potatoes, cabbage, corn, shot a black bear that came too close. James built a loft from stripped beams. Clara taught Marrable how to read contracts, how to check the weight of coin, how to speak with men without yielding anything. In town, they gave new names. No one questioned them. The world had moved on. Blood had long since soaked into the earth. Years passed like water down rock, not fast but certain. Marrable turned 16, then 17. She stopped wearing ribbons. She took to the rifle more than the books, but she never lost the music box. It stayed beside her bed, wrapped in cloth. She wound it on quiet nights when she thought no one was listening. Clara watched her from the porch sometimes and saw something familiar. A woman built from ash and want, forged in the silence between mercy and necessity. James grew slower, his hands stiffened. His limp worsened with the cold, but his eyes stayed sharp, and when he took Clara's hand, it still felt like promise. They never called it peace. That would have been dishonest. But it was safety. And sometimes, when the wind moved just right, Clara could almost forget the way her breath used to hitch at every knock on the door. The last winter before Marrable left, the 3 of them sat together at the fire, sipping weak coffee. The girl was already packed, her bags near the door, rifle strapped to her back. She wasn't running, she was choosing. "I'll head east first," she said. "Maybe back through the Dakotas, see what's still standing." "Careful of ghosts," James said. "I've got plenty already." Clara didn't cry. She placed a map in Marrable's hands. Marked in red were the places she should avoid. Marked in black, the ones she might find kindness. "You can come back any time," Clara said. "I will," the girl said, "when it's mine to protect." And then she was gone. A figure disappearing into the same wind that once carried Clara west, with nothing but a letter and a name. Years later, word came by a trapper, a woman in North Dakota, fast with a rifle, wearing a whalebone ring on a chain around her neck. Said she had a cabin, said no one messed with her chickens, said she was raising a child. Clara closed her eyes when she heard it, not from sorrow, from awe. One winter, that's all she had promised herself. One winter, and she'd leave. But she stayed. Through snow and silence. Through blood and fire. Through every season of their lives. And in the end, it had never been about escape. It had been about planting something in the dirt and watching it grow teeth.